The United Nations humanitarian chief Stephen O'Brien has said he is horrified by attacks on civilians in Syria after an airstrike on a rebel-held suburb of Damascus on Sunday killed nearly 100 people. Children were among the 96 dead and 240 injured when the Air Force attacked a market area in the suburb of Douma. Whole buildings were wrecked, cars were set on fire. The Syrian military says it targeted rebels, but local people insist most of the victims were civilians. Well, let's cross live now to Beirut, and we can speak to Mr. O'Brien, who's just back from a visit to Syria. Thank you very much for talking to us. Just tell us, in the 3 days you were there, what you were able to see for yourself.
Well, the whole objective of being there for 3 days was to go and see for myself the absolute devastation that has been caused by this very protracted conflict across Syria for now over 5 years. And it's absolutely terrible to see not only the devastation in those areas which have already been very badly damaged, in Homs, where all one had to do is to imagine what had happened to the lives of the people behind all those bombed out buildings and the empty windows, no glass left, and something of a ghost city in the old city. And then whilst I was meeting with Syrian government ministers in order to try to secure a better agreement for access for those of us engaged in the humanitarian life-saving work and the protection for civilians throughout this conflict, then of course the news started coming through that we had had this absolutely horrific airstrike on what turned out to be a marketplace, Douma, on the very outskirts of Damascus where I was having the meeting. So you can imagine it was incredibly distressing and just yet another example of this complete disregard for life. And it is unacceptable, it is clearly unlawful, and it has to stop. We have to find a way of getting a durable peace, and we have to recognise that bad and terrible as that is, equally there have been water shortages and shelling coming from the other side of the conflict, and all of them are illegitimate and unlawful weapons of war because they target civilians, and civilians are not meant to be the casualties of war.
We have seen many attempts over the course of the last few years to try to find some kind of political solution, but in the face of this ceaseless violence, what are you actually able to do to help?
Well, let me be absolutely clear. Of course, finding the facts for myself and the credibility and testimony I am able to bring back, whether it's to the Security Council, where I am asked to make my reports on a regular basis to those world leaders and their capitals. Equally, I meant to ensure that we can supply and marshal not just the resources but the delivery through some very brave humanitarian workers both at national and international level, through the UN agencies, because we have so many people who are vulnerable and in demand. And the UN, let us be clear, along with their implementing partners, have delivered during the course of this absolutely devastating, protracted crisis in the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Syria today. And I'm speaking to you from Beirut, where I can see some of the fallout with so many of the people who've had to flee or die, and many of the people are here in Lebanon and are being generously hosted by the Lebanese people. But be clear, equally, we have to keep going. We have to find solutions to the humanitarian needs, however difficult the access. But likewise, so we must never let up, however hard it is, in finding a political solution.
And when you make those requests that you mentioned, sorry to interrupt you, but when you make those requests for humanitarian access to the most desperately in need areas, what sort of response do you get? How successful are they?
Well, of course, it has been difficult. Whilst there has been delivery, even through these difficult times, over 5 million people have been receiving access to water. Yes, the need is greater than that. We're way below where we would wish to be. We're not funded to be able to do more than we wish, and we need to ask the international community generously to step up yet again to give us the funding to be able to do that with our implementing partners and through the coordination that I'm responsible for to make sure that that can happen. But equally, it is important when dealing with the government of Syria ministers to impress upon them, and indeed to have a dialogue, as I have done, that we need unimpeded access to wherever the need arises for humanitarian life-saving and protection of civilians, whether that is water, shelter, food, protection, healthcare, whatever is required. That is where we need to go, unimpeded, wherever it arises, however it arises, and whoever it is, whether they are under the control of government or anti-government forces. And that is why we have to be totally even-handed, but that is in light of the principle of international humanitarian law, and that is what we must implement.
Stephen O'Brien, thank you very much for talking to us from Beirut.